So today's session, Preserving America's Stained Glass, Unveiling Challenges, Myths, and Pathways to Sustainability, will be led by Megan McElfresh. Megan is the Executive Director of the Stained Glass Association of America and a lifelong stained glass artisan. Before joining the SGAA, she served as the Operations Director and Community Liaison at the life sciences firm in Northern Virginia. She also helped with IT and development for several art organizations. Her background in operations management and American glass art history gives her unique perspectives as the SGAA celebrates its 120 years of community and seeks to propel itself into a new era of service to the industry. In her ongoing research, she focuses on how the built environment, accessible artwork, and preservation policies impact community revitalization and economic development. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Megan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Linda. I don't usually have to listen to that about myself. That's a mouthful. Good afternoon. As Linda said, I'm Megan, and I'm the Executive Director here at the Stained Glass Association of America. I'm coming to you from Buffalo, New York, where our national headquarters are, and I'm always excited to share and do presentations and just collaborate and talk with others about what gets me excited about the built environment, and hopefully it gives all of you some new perspectives and tools to do what you do, whether you're advocating for your community or working on a specific project. I do have a caffeine problem and an excitement problem. So if at any point I am talking too fast, I don't know how you send out a Hail Mary, but get me to slow down and breathe. I have been really, really privileged to work alongside talented professionals in the industry and the broader specialty trades for my entire life. And, for a brief time, thought I would go out not into the arts, because that was a big thing for parents to do, was to encourage their kids not to go into the arts. So I studied economics instead, which is how I became an arts administrator, which is like the one thing that you can do in the arts and make less money at than being an artist. But I feel really blessed to be in a position where I understand the craft and the ecosystem that have to work together, and how that impacts and creates opportunities for us today. So this building you're seeing here is where we decided we would be headquartered. I am a young person that feels really passionately about historic buildings around me as irreplaceable structures and a really, really integral part of the communities that I love. I think they're vital to the health and well-being of our society. I want the money and the bandwidth to save all the things. So when I took on this job in 2018, I do not know if there's a closed caption option on Big Marker. I wanted to be in the thick of it. And so I decided that we would put our headquarters in the middle of a sacred space where we could see what the client was dealing with, look at the challenges that come with taking care of a massive sacred campus. What are the emotions day to day that lead up to those incredibly heated vestry meetings that we walk into all the time? Just putting our curiosity into the thick of everything that we deal with. As tradespeople, we sort of get the call at the end of the process, right? After the community work has been done, after the research has been done, bids have been put out, and then the tradespeople often were just showing up too late is how we were feeling. And we wanted to know more about how and why resources were becoming scarce. Or, as we very quickly discovered on moving into Trinity, why they are perceived to be as scarce as they are. So we're going to start with a little history, but maybe not the history you've heard before about the stained glass industry. You might be surprised to know that the Stained Glass Association of America celebrated its 120th year of service to the community in 2023. And today, our association has the largest membership in its history ever. We have just completed our 113th annual trade conference in Kansas City, Missouri. And our historic publication, the Stained Glass Quarterly, has tripled its readership in the last 6 years and has just entered at the beginning of this year its 120th year of continuous publication, which we are very proud of, given all the challenges of printing in this day and age. It's really our pride and joy. And yet, the common belief, perception, view, misconception is that stained glass is a lost art. It's a dying trade, that there are very, very few studios left in America. The reality is that stained glass wasn't a need in the earliest days of America. As you can imagine, if you think about this perspective with me for a minute, when the settlers at Jamestown were figuring out how to get through their first few harsh winters, they weren't really concerned with beautiful buildings. That was not exactly at the top of their to-do list. When America declared its independence from England, there was still a lot of other logistics that took top priority ahead of grand, opulent buildings. We were a new country, and the economic reality of building a new country meant that specialized art and architecture trades like stained glass really didn't gain traction until relatively recently. American architecture and the new economy didn't start to demand stained glass and other trades similar to stained glass until approximately the 1830s. Even within our own community, the stained glass community, we have a really over-romanticized notion of how we navigated those early years and came to be, of apprenticeships and this robust system of masters passing on the craft from one generation to the next. We have this misplaced belief. I grew up, I'm third generation, and I grew up being told and with the same belief that as recently as the 1960s, we had an apprenticeship structure to support a more widespread craft and hundreds more engaged in the trade, and that I was coming into my professional life as a stained glass artisan as we started a descent into extinction. But it turns out that we are historically way more DIY and way more scrappy than that story of romance suggests. The very first American-made figural window was installed in 1843, and they are the nativity windows. I'm sorry, they're at the Nativity for Christ Church at Pelham, New York. I always get all of those words backwards. My apologies. And they were designed and created by the Bolton brothers, who were entirely self-taught. The brothers were part of a family with strong ties to art in the church. William J. Bolton was initially trained as a painter and came from an artistic background. So he had great design sensibilities and a lot of natural talent and natural skills that contributed to his learning stained glass. But there were no established stained glass schools or traditions in the United States. And it wasn't as if he could pop over to the UK and just, take a few classes over there and head home. He did travel to England. He was influenced by the work that he saw there, but ultimately he learned everything he knew about stained glass through trial and error by taking apart stained glass windows being imported into the United States and putting them back together. Simultaneously, as the brothers are putting together their business and getting off the ground, and a few other studios are trying to gain momentum here in the United States, word of the Industrial Revolution and the building boom in America was traveling back across the pond. And stained glass, like many other trades in the US, was largely founded by the influx of skilled immigrants at that crucial time in our building history. These really talented craftspeople have been prevented from moving up within their own apprenticeship systems because there wasn't as much work for them to do in Europe. So they were very eager for the greater opportunity that America promised, and part of really huge waves of settlers coming over to America at that time. And while they were excited and dug right into those building structures, because the system had prevented them from moving up wherever they were coming from, whether it was Bavaria or England or Germany or Italy, they were not real keen to rebuild those same systems that had prevented them from striking out on their own in the first place. So they shared their faith and their hope and their skills, but they did not immediately reestablish those trade systems. America was expanding really rapidly, and even with those influxes of really talented community members, there was still a greater demand than what Americans could build. And the other side of that coin is that we could import windows more cheaply than we could make them in America, because the entire infrastructure of material had to be built to support the American craft, and American craftspeople were paid 3 times more than their European counterparts because they needed the extra income to build a country and to be part of that. So all of those challenges are what the architectural crafts are facing as they try to gain a sustainable foothold in the American economy. So the rhetoric that stained glass is a dying art suggests that it was this incredibly widespread craft that surges across the country and has thousands of craftspeople that sort of immediately gain traction and sort of get all over these challenges, and then starts to decline in the 1960s, about 100 years later. In reality, it took until 1903 for the stained glass industry to work with Congress to pass tariffs on stained glass art coming into the United States and level the playing field and have a chance for their industry to truly thrive. And at that time in 1903, there are 43 registered stained glass studios, mostly on the East Coast, but certainly spreading west. 43 is not that many. But in 1903 and in 1893, there had been only 25 stained glass studios. And those studios came together and formed what would become the Stained Glass Association of America to approach Congress about the tariffs and work together. And when they were successful in 1903, they officially organized and incorporated themselves as the Stained Glass Association of America. But 1903, as I am sure you all know, is not far away from other challenges that would face and sort of derail the entire world. It doesn't give us very much time for things like American opalescent art to thrive and take hold and get built. So what is beautiful about this time period is the innovation that's happening. We're all familiar with the stories of Tiffany and Lafarge and their drive to paint with glass and build these really incredible windows that we've never seen before. And that part of the romance is largely true. If we had more time today, I would completely get off on a complete side quest here about some of the spicier stories that exist there and how it wasn't all beautiful drapery glass and roses, and how Tiffany had a tendency to hoard supplies and pick fights with others and browbeat communities into ordering what he wanted them to order. But that's for another day. That's a fun sort of Friday night story. But there's just not a lot of time for American stained glass to really enjoy its gilded age, if you will, because by the end of the 1920s, this incredibly opulent style is starting to fall out of favor, and the world is starting to face new challenges. World War I is making people drastically rethink their lives and their spaces. And so just as these American studios had finally given themselves this opportunity to innovate and grow and really have their own life as the arts and crafts movement, it was all sort of coming to an end. So the community system that they had built was still very viable, but it still didn't need an educational aspect to keep it going, because stained glass is driven by market pressures, and they were simply changing too rapidly for the styles that have been built to really need to be passed on to another generation, because Americans were already shifting back toward previous European styles and popularity. And we had new waves of immigrants and people recovering from the war in Europe to supplement those desires. So this group, the Stained Glass Association of America, thank God they changed their name to something shorter, right? We started as the National Ornamental Glass Manufacturers Association, which doesn't abbreviate very nicely to anything. They continued to work together as a community to pass on knowledge when they would get together at national meetings. They traveled together. They started their magazine in 1906 to start recording their stories and what they were doing. But after that initial surge, everything really scaled back. And between 1920 and 1955, there really was not much growth in the industry. And that's perfectly understandable when we think about the fact that World War I and then the Great Depression and World War II really impacted all of the architectural trades. So that can be said about just about anybody. And after World War II, continuing with that theme, the nature of construction and architecture changes, right? There's a move toward mass production, toward using new materials like steel and concrete and plasterboard, and all of that made the detailed, labor-intensive trades like stained glass much less mainstream. So the industry becomes increasingly niche, which means it continues to suffer from a lack of consistent demand that would force it to create a formal education program here in the United States. So the entirety of our education system in the United States continues to be community, continues to be gathering at one another's workshops as we could, and summer meetings and articles in the magazine and sharing information with one another. But really, there is no major drive to be able to handle more than that. There's not the resources, there's not the administrative support, and there's not the restoration, there's not the preservation movement yet. So that begins to be the linchpin, I think, as we all know, in the 1960s and 1970s, that starts getting our community to think differently. So today, we remain the only accrediting body for architectural stained glass. We remain the only international North American organization that's trying to work together and provide education. And today, we have over 100. We have accredited professionals, and we have professionals, and we have over 100 of those studios across the United States and Canada. And we have thousands of public members that are passionate historians or hobbyists or teachers. They work in secondary schools, keeping trades alive in our high school programs. And so for me, when I am asked, are we a lost art? Are we in decline? My answer from an economic standpoint is that clearly we are not. What we are is young, and we are experimental. We are, as we have always been in America, an industry of passionate entrepreneurs, still hoping that one day we will have the structural support needed to have that American trade school, that American apprenticeship program, that romantic notion of beautifully passing on the trades from one generation to the next. And coming to realize that was really, really lovely. But it was also kind of stressful, right? Because if that was the case, and we weren't in decline, and there wasn't a shortage of resources, why does my job feel impossible? And why does every studio I talk to feel absolutely exhausted, completely overextended, and like they will never, ever, ever be able to get the job done? And luckily, my favorite thing to do is download research papers and read economics textbooks. I was sure there was an answer out there somewhere. And I've met some incredible people along the way as I continue to study this phenomenon. And these misconceptions, these stories that we build around our buildings, around the trades, around our industries, they have a real financial impact on the work that all of us do. It creates this additional crisis in the ecosystem of North America's sacred spaces to believe and to think that you might be working with the very last stained glass studio that exists in North America, right? It prevents you from getting competitive quotes. It creates the illusion of a supply chain issue. I am not saying that we don't have supply chain issues, and I'm not saying that we don't have education issues, but that emotional feeling, of saying that it's a dying trade does have a very real financial impact on all of us. As we all know, we have more than enough emotions to deal with on a day-to-day basis. We don't need to invent extra ones. So this is where I now find a massive amount of additional hope in where we are today, because it forces us all to go out and ask for help and collaboration with researchers and academics and policymakers. Coming to this realization in the trades is helping us get out of our silos and go make friends, which is not a natural skill set for us. But if we don't get out of our silos and share our story and this information, then we will never be able to build parallel structures that can better support all of us. So what you're looking at here is I took a screenshot of from my office and pinned every sacred space just in this one little area of Buffalo, New York, where I am. That's a lot of spaces. And it starts adding that story has been a huge benefit and a result of this collaboration, right? Is maybe, just maybe, our sense of a lack of resources is not just because we have this over romanticized story of how we got here and where we are and whether or not the trade is dying, but also because as tradespeople that have kept our heads down in our own silos, we sort of don't realize that we're out here firefighting instead of triaging. We get phone calls all day, every day. Everybody needs help with their windows. We're going to try to go out there and respond. But when you only have a few studios per region and there is no rhyme or reason or overarching regional plan to how you are going to save this many sacred structures, then of course resources are going to feel limited. We're not working efficiently with what we have. So America's Industrial Revolution created this incredibly interesting reality of hundreds of buildings being built as if we would always have horses and buggies, as if we would not keep moving west, all of these issues, right? Like this is what we all deal with every day, an overwhelming inventory of buildings that need to be saved. And sacred spaces have been left out of the studies by and large. They don't fall into the arts and cultural studies. They don't fall into our tax registers, right? So there's a lot of data that's missing about how we can save these buildings and what conditions they're in overall. You know, what gets a green light for obvious reasons? What have we already lost? We just don't know. And as tradespeople, we can't possibly answer that question. We're just answering the call and running out with our fire hoses. And so those two forces together are having a really major impact on these feelings of a lack of resources. And I am not coming to you today with a magical solution to this problem, but I am awfully glad that we're digging into it because I have full faith that when we all work collaboratively, we'll come up with something. Meanwhile, the firefight, right? It is true that when we get calls, right, part of the reason why we're getting all of these calls at one time all across, especially, you know, we're here in the Rust Belt on the East Coast, 90% of the calls we get are repair and restoration phone calls. And it makes sense. The age of these buildings is all pretty similar by and large. And so the age of these structures and the art inside of them is all sort of hitting this massive preservation milestone at the same time. That's something we've all sort of wrapped our heads around and come to figure out. And it does not help that sort of constant neglect of small repairs and basic maintenance has created a massive problem across the country. But while one of these windows is a genuine, like, drop everything you're doing, we have a big problem here. The other one would make it, you know, another 20 years while we fixed the fires, right? So one of the things that we hope that comes perhaps out of these collaborations is what if we had a way to assess regional buildings and take the the resources we have right now, both manpower and material wise, and be able to say to a community that, don't worry, you're on our list, right? That it's just like a hospital waiting room. Who's having a heart attack and who stepped on a nail, right? There's a difference in what we need to tackle first. And it is just very rare that stained glass is life and death. You'd never know it from the phone calls we get here, but it is very rare that your stained glass windows are actually going to fall out of your building if we don't rush out there and get out there today. And if we could alleviate, in any way, some of that stress that we are all feeling, I think it would go a really long way towards stretching our dollars. And again, we don't have that solution yet, but that's part of today's conversation as we figure out administratively how to work with what we have. Of course, the philanthropic nature of what we're all working with is always changing incredibly rapidly. You add the reality of shrinking congregations, and why fix up one man's memorial window when you can have your own gleaming gold tower with your name on it. But we're seeing an increase of communities coming together to fund projects. Sacred spaces still make up 50% of our nation's available community gathering spaces. And that is enormously important, whether people are religious or not. Partners for Sacred Spaces has a lot of great data on this. We know that, that a vast majority of the people that Sacred Spaces serve are not the people that are there for Jesus on Sunday. So communities are starting to provide support and funding. And if we can share these sorts of stories with them, they will understand, I think, why we need their help as well. And this sort of brings me to what I hope philosophically becomes the next stage of the conversation about finding sustainable solutions for all of our communities, no matter where they are. These are things that can impact all of us as we look at these projects. What you're looking at here is a really, really common situation in Buffalo, New York, and everywhere, right? Is that we've got a building that has suffered a lot of neglect and a lot of decay. It's been bought by a nonprofit that wants to turn it into a theater, and one of our teams goes out to take a look at the windows and figure out what's going on, and they are looking at these windows and realize that they're temporary glazing solutions, right? Like somebody pointed and selected this design, and these were installed to be a temporary solution. On the other side of the building, I thought I had taken a picture of it, but maybe I didn't. On the other side of the building is a memorial window. And you can tell that like they were ordered, but about halfway down the church, they ran out of money. And so these temporary glazing windows were never replaced. So one of the questions that maybe we could start asking ourselves and that we could start creating resources for would be helping communities know the difference between a historically relevant window. I can hear the screaming now. I'm not putting my foot down and telling you all what is right or wrong. We're sharing information here. But if there was a way for communities to understand what was and was not installed with an intent to be temporary, why do we put an expiration date on new memorial windows? Again, it's not for me to decide what the right or wrong answer is for this community, but there is a different cost in building new and in restoring. And this building is no longer being used for sacred purposes. And so the conversation came up in this space as we struggled to find the brass stencil that would have made the background pieces. There was clearly a lot of cold painting. The vitreous paints are not fired properly to begin with. A lot of these windows were built by young people that were in training, so the quality is very low. The studios themselves would select materials that they sort of had extra of, right? Like we've all walked into a space that has like baby puke brown sort of Victorian-ish windows and thought like, ooh, who chose that color, right? And it's because it's what they had, right? Like they weren't going to use their most expensive ruby red on a temporary window that everybody thought would only be there for a couple of years at the most. So as tradespeople and as preservationists, if we can learn more and share more about the historic validity of some of these windows, maybe there's an opportunity for this community to leverage some new artwork as a way to also help raise funds for the project overall. And that is an option that is rarely, if ever, offered to communities. And there are a multitude of reasons why that might be, right? We get attached to even the ugliest stained glass windows on the planet. I know we do. I have never had somebody walk up to me and say, yeah, I just hate stained glass. All the stained glass I've ever seen is hideous and I just hate it, right? Like we've never heard anybody say that. Compounding that problem, these are pictures from Texas because of course they are. Compounding that problem, as we deferred maintenance, some of these windows that were never meant to be permanent, have had, as we all are familiar, sort of plastics and Lexans and things sort of smacked up on top of them to preserve the windows and kick the can down the road, as opposed to dealing with the wood rot and the other structural issues that were happening. So that adds a massive amount of cost to restoring some of these windows. And again, we're not talking about, a DeScenzo window from Philadelphia that we only have 12 of in the United States that we should guard with our lives, right? We are talking about very clearly identified temporary glazing solutions that some of these communities are paying $80,000 a window to save, not knowing that they were never meant to be there this long in the first place. One of those real financial impacts that I alluded to earlier is that on many of our sites, especially obviously there's a greater number of studios on each of the coasts, on the East Coast, on the West Coast. Like we're all familiar with the geography problems of bringing in experts. And one of the very real problems that we see way too often is somebody finding a glazier, glass person, studio, like somebody knows somebody who knows somebody, and they're going to fix the windows. And this is a situation where a gentleman was asked to restore these incredibly historically relevant lamb windows, and they didn't know what to do. So they smeared black silicone under the lead flanges instead of new glazing putty, and sort of pushed and flattened the windows back into place. And they charged this space $800,000 for the restoration of this work. And now the windows, and it absolutely destroyed the windows. And now, just 2 years later, it is an $8 million massive conservation project to get all this crap off the windows and do it right. And the reason this happened is because the community genuinely believed that they were talking to the only stained glass person left alive in the United States. That's a real consequence of telling these stories and of perpetuating this myth of dying trades and a lack of expertise. And when a bid seems too low and too good to be true, and that studio seems like the only game in town, I'm telling you that's exactly what it is. It is too good to be true. That studio is not the only studio in town, and it's not an emergency. Take a step back. Let's get more information. Because in a situation where we maybe don't have a lack of resources, we certainly don't have resources to waste either. And I think that's really the theme of what I'm trying to get at overall is we've got to be smart about what we have. So from an industry standpoint, we are trying to be way more active about getting our young people paired up with mentors out into the field, making a mess of things. Young people are way better at technology than some of us old nuts are. And I say that as somebody with zero desire to learn new technologies because I love working with my hands, right? I know I'm part of that problem, but young people have a way to access technology and use it to assess the conditions of windows in a way that a lot of us never could have dreamed of when we were coming up in the trade. And as we sort of force them to pair up with mentors who otherwise would not have taken on a young person, we are finding really cool ways to utilize technology to make sure some of those mistakes don't happen. So if I just summarize all of that into categories of what keeps me up at night, keeps me drinking way too much coffee, this would be it. And what's in black at the top here is what I do day to day, and what I worry about is how are we going to get more furnace bricks here from Germany to rebuild, to do the annual rebuilds of our furnaces and keep our manufacturers going? How are we going to get our leads here from Canada after next week? Where's the material coming from? And how do I take incredibly talented people that are professional hermits and get them to make friends with young people that seem to speak a different language and start building that educational infrastructure the way we've always done it in America, with duct tape and baling twine. And hopefully we'll have the opportunity to build those incredible apprenticeship systems. But if DIY is what we were built on, how do we encourage the mentorship that's needed to close the generation gap now? That's what I worry about and do day in and day out. What is in red is what we cannot do without community collaboration. We cannot find a way to triage instead of firefight if we do not build relationships with our larger regional communities. Disaster prevention is something we are not going to be able to tackle better if we don't build relationships with our insurance companies, which, is rarely anyone's favorite thing to do. But surprisingly, we have a lot of caring art professionals that work in the insurance industry that don't want to see what you're seeing on the right either. This is in Philadelphia, actually, just a few weeks ago, the picture on the screen now. The philosophical opportunities in bottom in blue, we have no idea how to start resolving. They're truly team efforts. It's going to take conversation, and it's going to take individual case studies, and it's going to take a lot of documentation and late night conversations over a beer or whatever it takes to get us to start rethinking some of our spaces as we work with what we have. Do not know why that slide is popping up again. This is a cartoon that ran in our paper here in Buffalo just a few weeks ago. We literally have a church on every corner of Buffalo, as you saw. And in the last couple of months, for whatever reason, bars have been burning to the ground seemingly every week. We wake up and yet another bar is burned to the ground. I'd like to blame the Bills. That's what we do here in Buffalo, but it was not their fault. And it is truly irksome to me, the community turnout to save a bar in like 48 hours. When I've been screaming on the church steps next door for 7 straight years, hoping to catch crumbs. And again, not sure what the solution is, but I know it's not leaving sacred spaces out of economic studies, out of arts and cultural studies, and out of the conversation in general when we're doing economic planning at a regional level. There's so much about sacred spaces that gets left out of the conversation and out of relevant tax credit studies, because the misconception is that churches are dying, the trades are dying, and that it's just a space for religion, for faith. But if we don't take care of those buildings, we don't have a place for the food pantries and the AA meetings. And that's where the work that Partners for Sacred Spaces does, I think, needs to be radically expanded, because it's just not getting down to the community level. And we desperately need these community spaces to gather in. This is what everybody's really sure that we look like in the shop. I don't think they're wrong. I still look pretty out of place myself out in the field a lot of the time. And we definitely are an aging trade. We definitely have a massive generation gap. So much as I would like to have that solved overnight, and this is this is still like the master glass blower that supplies a ton of the hand blow glass we use in the United States. It's terrifying, right? To look out at our industry and think that we are a few funerals away from insolvency. That's not fun. I rely a lot on my colleagues and on the relationships that I've built. This trade study, if anybody on the call has not seen it, is absolutely required reading, because without the trades, everything that we do is just going to get harder and harder. And my favorite part of this study was the part of it that put a number. Like when I first reach out to these lovely people and I say, I want to send an apprentice out, right? For the first few years, all I heard was, young people don't want to work. Don't send me those kids. They're here for 2 weeks and they see how hard it is and they leave. And they weren't wrong, right? We all feel that. And when you are trying to build mentorship systems and apprenticeship systems, it does feel like that a lot. And my favorite part of the study that I found just a relief, validating all of the emotions, was the part of this study that didn't just show what the historic trades do. That's enormously important, right? Like all of these facts and figures that they put in here are enormously helpful. But what it did for me in my day-to-day job was show that to convert someone from just exposing them to the trade to getting them to really commit to the trade and fall in love with the trade, that data is 16 to 1. So yeah, 16 kids are going to stick around for 2 weeks and they're going to walk out the door. But that next one will stay. And if you know that, you are a lot more willing to say yes when I call you and ask if you'll take somebody on. And it has made a real difference in getting our studios and our more experienced members to embrace young people and start engaging with them in a new way. Just letting them know that they're not insane, and that yes, not every person that walks through their door is going to stay, has been one of the absolute biggest tools that has helped us start making real change here. This is a program here in Buffalo, New York that we've been helping with. A church was slated for demolition, and a university professor took it on and decided that they would use it as a laboratory. They would strip sections of it after careful study back to the studs so that these young people could physically see how the building was built, so that as they were learning to build in the same building, they could simultaneously be touching the material and studying how their space was created from the nails up. And we do see more of these programs starting to be built in communities, regions, and states across the country. And the same ratio, that 16-to-1 ratio, can be really helpful when you're trying to come together as a community and justify the existence of a program that, it's only 20 kids a year. That matters. That makes a difference, right? This is a fantastic project in Ohio that's happening in Athens, Ohio, where one of our most experienced studios is working with a young emerging studio out on site, has partnered with them on the job and brought them on as part of the team, which is not standard in our industry, right? If you're working together with another studio, it's because the turnaround time is tight and you're going to subcontract out some of the painting work, right? But building multi-generational teams on purpose is new, and it's awesome, and it's very cool. It's very inspiring, and it's built mentorship relationships that will last a lifetime. So that's a lot to consider. That's I know it's a lot of unknowns. I know it's a lot of big questions that don't seem to have answers, but those are the parts of the puzzle that we deal with here in our day job. And then, philosophically, when we go out and get lost in a library somewhere, trying to figure out what to do next, right? To make this feel less impossible. As somebody who has worked 7 days a week, 16 hours a day up on scaffolding myself, because I want to save all of the things for my community. How do I do that and still make it to my daughter's dance recital on time? Right? Like something's got to give. And I come back to home base, where I get to live in one of the most incredible collections of stained glass in the nation. We're one of the few installations in the nation that has both Tiffany and Lafarge windows side by side for comparison, in addition to 5 other studios. So as a collection of different styles and kinds of stained glass and how they're aging, and just the technical stained glass stuff that us craftspeople really, really get excited about, I could not be in a better place. But you also maybe notice that we've got, I'm pretty sure I can use this little tool here, right? There's a window right over here on one side. This is a Lafarge window that is very, very famous. They sent it to France, won a prize, and the French government tried to buy it in the early 1900s. And we said, I don't know if you've heard of Buffalo. It's very cold. We got a hole in the wall. Send that sucker back. You can't have it. And this window is in very dire condition because it's had some extra road issues, and just and beside it are two other wonderful windows. But over here on the opposite side is one of those temporary glazing placeholder windows, and it is ugly. It is not enjoyable. It is the most heinous shades of pink and brown. And this is one of the most active congregations in the region, but they were told that they should restore this window and that they could not have something new. I don't know what the right decision is for them or not, but why couldn't they order a memorial window now? Why couldn't they document the placeholder window, carefully have it created, and order a new window now? The quote they were given to restore their windows in the sanctuary was $6 million 6 years ago. So that number is higher now. And it is a massive fundraising burden on this community. And if the glass is saved, but the community is so broke at the end of it that ultimately they're driven out of the space anyway because they can't afford to keep heating the building, have we really done our job? I don't know the answer, but I love that we're talking about it now. I love that the trades are involved in these conversations. This picture actually makes the window look prettier. I am telling you, standing in person in front of this window, it is not good. Right? Back to this space. Here's the other window. Here's the other picture I thought I took from the other side. You can tell what windows were replaced as memorial windows and what's still hanging out as a placeholder window, right? What's the right decision? How do we take occasionally these situations and turn them into opportunities, use them to galvanize the community? And we have barely scratched the surface of that in the United States, which is odd because I will close with this. Some of the most notable installations in stained glass have happened in just the last 10 years. What you're looking at here is the largest stained glass window in the world. It is at Church of the Resurrection, a Methodist church in Leawood, Kansas. And the stained glass window is the size of a basketball court. Jesus is 40 feet tall. Each of these panels that you see here, each of these sort of sections right here is 4 feet by 5 feet. It's absolutely massive. And it was just installed. It was just built and installed in 2017. The largest stained glass dome in the world was just built a little over 10 years ago, and it is installed underground in a transit station in Asia. And it is fantastic. People get married here. Like, I love it. In Utah, one of our studios worked with the UVU to install the Roots of Knowledge at the library. This massive installation took 12 years. And while they were building it, the studio grew to 150 employees. In its heyday, Tiffany employed 125. So again, to say that stained glass is dying when we're building things like this now is right, sort of proves the point that we're not. As if that installation wasn't big enough, that same studio, Holdman Studios in Utah, has decided that now he's going to build an entire stained glass structure in just outside of Salt Lake City in Utah, and they've managed to fund this project now and get it started. And it's the themes behind it. They're calling it the Roots of Humanity, the Sphere of Light. And It's absolutely incredible. I don't know what to think. It's mind-bending. This is in a hospital. This is in a children's hospital, and it was just installed a few months ago. And there are so many beautiful little bits and pieces at eye level for the kids, and seeing sick kids walk through this space and light up when they find their favorite animal, or they find a little piece that lights them up. Like, this is what we still do today. That power, that reason behind why we have stained glass in our environments, that's never gone anywhere, right? And it helps us do what we all do, right? Like, I can't imagine being a cancer researcher, and I can't imagine working in a laboratory processing rape kits day in and day out and keeping my sanity. And access to light and access to spaces like this helps all of us do that work. And sacred spaces should still be that. And I think we can encourage them to tell that story better, and to remind people that that's still what they do. So that thing that still drives us all to get up, at the start of the day and go save spaces is really about making sure that our communities have healthy, wonderful, inspirational spaces to gather and do hard things, to celebrate new beginnings, to to mourn loss, to have angry town halls, whatever it is. And what we see happening that's new, I think, can galvanize and inspire us to also help find ways to save the old. So that is what I want to leave you all and everybody with. Our website, stainedglass.org, is a massive website with lots and lots of different resources on it. If there's something you might like to know more about, it's a library of information. And the handouts today are the two things that are clicked on most common on our website. One is a client checklist. It's like a list of questions that you would ask if you were interviewing studios about a job, as part of like reviewing RFPs. And the other link that's clicked on the most often is about how to clean my stained glass windows. So I included those as handouts, but there is so much on our website, and we here at the office are always available. We do a lot of public advocacy work. We help send out bids so that you get those elusive additional bids that you need for the job, and all of that. So thank you